We begin today's shiur 11 lines from the top of Daf Samach Daled. You'll notice there is a new Mishnah. On the side of the Gemara, under the Nosei, the topic heading, we've written Hashoya im Isha Eser Shanim, a person who lived with his wife for a period of 10 years below Yalda and did not give birth. Over the course of 10 years, the couple remained childless. What do we do now? So we read the Mishnah, Nasa Isha V'Sha Ima Eser Shanim, a man married a wife and stayed with her for 10 years below Yalda, and she did not bear any children. Eino Rashoy Levatel, the man, the husband, is not entitled to desist from attempting procreation. Girsha, in the event that he divorces her, Muteres linose le'acher, she is allowed to marry another man. And when we speak about marrying another man, we're talking about a man who has not as yet fulfilled his mitzvah of pru uravu. So he is allowed to take in this woman who, for a period of 10 years, did not bear any children. V'rashoy hasheni lishos imo eser shanim, and that second husband is also allowed to continue living with her for 10 years. V'im hipila, if this woman experienced a miscarriage, moina misha shipila, the clock starts, or can we say restarts, from the time she experienced the miscarriage. Rashi on the top says, Eino rashoy levatel, a man who was married to a woman and she did not bear children for him, and they tried for 10 years. So we said he cannot be mevatel, he cannot desist from attempting to fulfill the mitzvah of procreation. Ela oya garshena, he has the following choices: to either divorce her, o yisa acheres ima, or, of course, in the time of the Gemara, polygamy was allowed. We're not going to say it was necessarily encouraged, but it was something that would not be a violation of any particular halacha, and therefore he could take a second wife in order to procreate with her. The Gemara, Tanu Rabbana, Nasa Isha V'Sha Ima Eser Shanim. We have a Tanaic source in which the source opens like our Mishnah. A man married a woman, stayed with her for 10 years, V'lo Yalda, and she did not bear any children for him. Yotzi V'Yitein Ksuba, he is to divorce her and give her the money due to her through the Ksuba marriage contract. Shema Lo Zacha Libanos Mimena. It might be that he did not merit to have children. Libanos literally is to build a family through her. Afal Pishein Raya Lodavar Zech Lodavar, even though there's not an absolute proof to this idea of 10 years, we nevertheless have an allusion to it. The pasuk says regarding Avraham Avinu and his wife Sarah, they were a childless couple, and it says Miketz Eser Shanim Loshevas Avram Be'eretz Canaan. After 10 years of their dwelling in the land of Israel, so then we know that he took Sarah's bondmaid Hagar in order to have a child. Rashi on the third line from the top, Miketz Eser Shanim Bo Al Hagar, after 10 years of being in the land of Israel and not having children, so he then took in Hagar, who was the mother of Yishmael. V'hai delo nosiv lo b'hanach shoni kamoy ad shelo bo l'eretz Canaan, and that which he didn't marry her during the years prior to his coming to the land of Israel. Shahayu shonim merubos b'Padan Aram. There were many years that they had been living in Padan Aram, the area where Avraham had come from before the land of Canaan, Israel. We learn from here that the years that one had dwelt in the diaspora, the area outside of Israel, doesn't count. Dilmo mishum avoin chutza la'aretz heim akurim. It could be that because of the sin of dwelling outside the land of Israel, they were barren. This concept of the sin of dwelling outside the land of Israel is also alluded to in Maseches Brachos on Daf Nun Zayin, where the Gemara features someone who sees himself in a dream unclothed while standing in Babylonia. And one is advised to look at Rashi's comment over there on this matter. So we continue in the Gemara text. The pasuk, as we read it, Miketz Eser Shonim L'Shevas Avram Beretz Canaan L'Lamdecha. This teaches us, as we saw in Rashi, She'ein Yeshivas Chutza L'Oretz Oila Loi Min Haminyan. The years that they had dwelt in the diaspora, in the land outside of Israel, doesn't count. In other words, the clock restarts from their coming to the land of Israel. So 10 years in the land of Israel. From Rashi, there's room to debate, does this whole concept of the 10-year dwelling together even make a difference when it comes to living outside the land of Israel? In other words, the barrenness there is attributed to some other factor other than the marriage between these two people, considering that one of them may be childless, but rather the lack of childbearing is a function of their dwelling outside the land of Israel. But that is a topic that needs to be investigated further. But as far as the simple pshat in our Gemara is concerned, that when you have a couple that was childless outside the land of Israel for whatever number of years, Rashi says they dwelt many years outside of Israel, but once they come into the land of Israel, the clock starts again. And now, with this idea that we could attribute their childlessness, their barrenness, to an outside factor, we come to the following conclusion. We continue in the Gemara. Lafika cholahu o shechol sahi. If he had been ill or she had been ill, other reasons, just like the line before said, the years that they dwelt outside the land of Israel don't count toward the 10 years, i.e. when they come to the land of Israel, the clock starts all over again, because we can attribute the barrenness to their having been in Chutz La'aretz. Here too, if they were sick, we can attribute their barrenness to that. Shneim chavushim bebeis hasurim, or the couple was incarcerated. So that also would be a reason for non-childbearing. Ein oilin lo min haminyan. Those years, the time in which they were either sick or they were incarcerated, they do not count toward the 10 years. Omar le Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava asks Rav Nachman, v'leilif mi Yitzchak, why not learn the number of years in which a couple can remain together in anticipation of having a child? Is the number should be learned from the case of Yitzchak. He married, and for a period of 20 years did not have children. The pasuk tells us that Yitzchak was age 40 when he took Rivka, and that Yitzchak was 60 when he and Rivka had their twin sons, Esav and Yaakov. So we see 20 years from age 40 to age 60. Omar le, Rav Nachman answers, Yitzchak okur hoya. Yitzchak was a barren individual. He was apparently sterile, and it was because of him that no children were born, and therefore there's no urgency for anything to be done. The woman is not commanded to have children; it's his obligation. And he was sterile. If that be the case, Avram Nami Okur Hoya, we know that Avram was also Okur. He was also sterile. So how is it that we choose to learn from Avram and not learn from Yitzchak? Hahu, the number of years of Yitzchak is really needed for something else. There's a reason the Torah gave us those years, age 40 and then age 60, but not for the purpose of this halacha of how many years do the couple give it a try. So the Gemara says that Ahu, the years of Yitzchak, miboyalei lich Reb Chia bar Abba. They're needed for what Reb Chia bar Abba teaches. The Reb Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yochanan, lama nimnu shnoisav shel Yishmael. Why were the years of Yishmael counted? Kedei liyachis ben shnoisav shel Yankiv. In order for us to calculate the years of Yankiv. So we take a look at the Rashi, less than halfway down the Rashi commentary. Hahu mi boyalei, klomar Yitzchak okur hoya mishum hachi lo nosev achrita. Yitzchak was sterile, and therefore he didn't marry another woman. Ukrod Yitzchak ben shishim shana, the pasuk that says that Yitzchak was 60 years old. Lo yisera he. It's not an extra pasuk, the tema, that we should be able to conclude. Lahachi kasvei rachmana lemigmar minei shehias esrim shana. It's therefore telling us that the couple dwells together for 20 years. Tahu miboyale, that pasuk of Yitzchak was 60 years, is needed for something else, namely for the calculation of the years of Yankiv. Avol miketz eser shanim d'Avram, the pasuk that said after 10 years Avram then took Hagar, afagav de okur hava, even though he was sterile. Yalfinon minei, we will learn from his story. Ti'i lav lidrasha, if that was not the purpose of the pasuk, lamai hilchasa kashmina kra miketz eser shanim. What other reason was there for the Torah to tell us that after 10 years he took Hagar? So we said in the Gemara, why was the age of Yitzchak taught to us? Rashi continues, liyachis bohem leida shnoisev shel Yankiv ben kama shanim hoya kisholach lebeis ever ukishamad al habe'er. The knowledge of Yitzchak being 60 enables us to calculate eventually the age and the years of Yankiv, how old he was when he went to the yeshiva of Aver, and how old he was when he eventually got to Aram, to the house of Lavan. Ubishili Gemara, Bishili Perek Aleph of Megillah, at the end of the first perek of Megillah, Meforish Law, the Gemara there elaborates on this calculation. V'hai krod Yitzchak ben shishim shana maisi lahasam. This pasuk of Yitzchak being 60 years old is cited there in Maseches Megillah. Di'alfinu minei, we learn from that calculation the Gadol Talmud Torah mikubed ava'im, that the mitzvah of the study of Torah is a greater mitzvah than the mitzvah of honoring one's mother and father. All the years that Yankiv was studying in the yeshiva of Aver, he was not held accountable for his lack of fulfilling the mitzvah of kibud av v'aim. Now, we're not going to elaborate on that, but all of that is featured in Maseches Megillah at the end of the first perek. We continue in the Gemara. Omar Rebbe Yitzchak. We have a note on the side under the nosei, the topic heading is the inability of our patriarchs to bear children. Under the mivneh heading, the structural note, we have a trapezoid or a volcano shape. These are Meimros Shel Rebbe Yitzchak al ha'avois v'oid, comments of Rebbe Yitzchak concerning the patriarchs and other and something else as well. So the series begins. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak, appropriately enough, Yitzchak Avinu Okur Hoya. Rabbi Yitzchak tells us that our patriarch Yitzchak was a sterile individual. Shenemar, and we have on the side a quote of the pasuk from Bereshis Perek Chof Hey, pasuk Chof Aleph. The pasuk says, and we're reading from the side of the Gemara, Vayetar Yitzchak Lashem L'nochach ishto, and Isaac prayed to the Almighty in the presence or opposite his wife. Ki akara he, she was barren. Vayeoser loy Hashem, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu answered his prayers. Vata Rivka ishto, and his wife Rivka became pregnant. So the Rabbi Yitzchak tells us that Yitzchak himself was barren. When you read the pasuk as we just did, it reveals to us on the simple translation level that Rivka was barren. So we see in our Gemara, Shneimar Vayetar Yitzchok Lashem Lenochach Ishto. That's what the text of the pasuk says. Al Ishto Lo Nemar. It doesn't say that he prayed regarding his wife. That's Al Ishto would be for his wife or regarding his wife. That's not the language. Elo Lenochach. The word, a rather unusual word that's chosen, is the word Lenochach. Milame, this change in expression from the usual teaches us Sheshneim Akurin Hoyu. They in fact were both barren. So that when the pasuk says Isaac was praying Lenochach Ishto, it's as if that her situation reflected upon him that just like she was barren, he too was barren. Ihachi, if that be the case, what it says in the Torah, Vayeaser lohem miboyle, the language of the Almighty answering lo is him, third person singular. It answered him. It should have said he answered them. If he was barren in addition to she, so they both needed the prayer to be answered. The Rashi, Vayeser lohem miboyle bishlama I amris tfilas Yitzchok al ishtoy. So if you say that the prayer of Isaac was for his wife, in other words, he was fine, but he was praying for his wife exclusively. Hainu dichti Vayeser lo. The language of the pasuk would make sense that his prayer was answered. In other words, his prayer, kamo shoy mispalo oleha, as he was praying for her. Vatahar Rivka Ishto, and as the prayer was answered, and she, his wife, became pregnant. If you say that he in fact was praying for himself because he was barren, and Lenochach Ishto means that he was praying in the presence of her prayers as well, they were both praying, so which the language indicates. Lenochach Ishto, he was praying opposite or in the presence of his wife who was also praying. Again, that's what Lenochach implies. Mashma, that both of them were praying. So Vayaser lahem miboyle, the language should have been the Almighty answered them. So why does the pasuk report the Almighty's response to the prayer in the singular, answering him? The Gemara answers, Lefi she'enoi doime tfilas tzadik ben tzadik letfilas tzadik ben roshi. You can't compare the effectiveness or the quality of a prayer when you have a righteous person who is the progeny of a righteous individual. In other words, Yitzchak was preceded generationally by Avraham, a tzaddik as well. Rivka, though she was a tzaddikess, her father was wicked. So an interesting concept comes from this Gemara, that when one prays, and the hope is that one's prayers are answered, there are factors other than the individual himself that's praying that come into play. There's this issue of father, of the merit one has, the merit one has from his forebears. We call that schus avos. And in general, philosophically, this should have a great deal of influence on people when they decide how they should live and what course they should take. Taking into consideration one who, of course, is concerned with his descendants, that if one practices a life of piety, so his personal investment into the lifestyle he chooses will actually have dividends for his children when they turn to the Almighty in prayer. So you're investing not only, of course, in your own personal welfare by keeping the Torah mitzvahs, but you're also investing into this spiritual account from which your children can draw. Unfortunately, Rivka, though she was a top-rate tzadikes, a tzadikes gemura, no question about it, but she didn't have that account from which to withdraw in the time of need. No fault of hers, of course, but If one has it, so one's got it. And that's why the tefillah of a tzaddik ben tzaddik has more power than the tefillah of a tzaddik ben rasha. Omar Rabbi Yitzchak, Mipnei ma hoyu avoseinu akurim. Rabbi Yitzchak asks, why was it heavenly ordained that our forebears, our patriarchs, should be sterile? And the answer is, and an amazing answer, Mipnei she'HaKadosh Baruch Hu mis'ave l'tfiloson shel tzadikim. Literal translation is the Almighty has a desire, kivyochel, as much as we can speak in human terms, the Almighty desires the prayers of the righteous. So you have an incredible dichotomy, whereas when it comes to human beings, prayer is the means to an ends. When it comes to the Almighty, the prayer actually is the ends in itself. And in order to achieve that end, the Almighty will do things that might on the surface appear to be harsh, in this case rendering the patriarchs barren, but we, having the value of hindsight, can derive from this an incredibly valuable lesson, and that is, if one knows at the outset that the Almighty is desirous of hearing our prayers and supplication, why wait till the time of need? Your humble servant who is currently reaching your ears suggests that when, based of course on the Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah, that one should pray, one should muster up as much energy as he can in prayer when things are going well, when you feel good, when you are financially solvent. It's then that you should pray with as much diligence and effort as possible, because according to what we see in the Gemara, we're not trying to play God over here, but we're working with what the Chazal revealed to us. What more can we do as human beings? And that having been said, if the Almighty is desirous of tefillas, and as a result of that, He will bring in order to hear tefillas, He will bring troubles to people in order to motivate them to pray, we can be one step ahead and motivate ourselves to pray when things are going well. And again, that is not my own idea, that's based on the Gemara in Maseches Avodah Zarah. We continue in our Gemara. V'Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Lama nimshalot tfilosin shel tzadikim ka'asar. An asar is a pitchfork. Pitchfork is used to flip over grains that are drying out, or you want to move them from one place to another. So a pitchfork is slipped under the grain stalks, and you can thereby move large amounts of grain. The pasuk used the word vaye'etar and vaye'oser, and the root of that word is artar. Artar, and with an ayin, is a pitchfork. So why does the Torah use the term pitchfork in the context of the prayers of the righteous? The Gemara answers, just like a pitchfork flips over grains from one place to another. The idea of flipping over is important here to emphasize. So so too the prayers of the righteous flip over, change the dealings, the traits, the characteristics of the Almighty, midas ragzonis lemidas rachmanis, from the attribute of wrath to that of compassion. In Maseches Sukkah, if I'm not mistaken, you find a parallel drasha, and there's one word difference, and there the Gemara uses the expression midas achzorius lemidas rachmanis. Omar Rabbi Ami, Avrom v'tzara tumtumim hoyu. The word tumtum is a situation where a person's gender is not clear because the organs of gender are covered over. There's a skin, there's a membrane that covers that area over, and such an individual is called a tumtum. So Reb Ami says that Avram and Sarah were both this type of individual, tumtumin. Shnemar, the pasuk says, Habitu el tsur chosav tem. We're at the top of Omid Beis. The tsur, we say chutzav tem. The el makeves bor nu kar tem. Uksiv habitu el Avram avichem ve'el Sarah techolalchem. So we're darshaning psukim that are found in Yishaya Perek Nun Aleph. The pasuk tells us to gaze upon Tsur Chutzavtem. Rashi at the top says, and maybe we should translate it. Tsur is a rock that's been hewn out. Chutzav, the Chatzov is to hew something out, to hew rock out. And Rashi says, Chutzavtem naase lo zachrus. It's as if to say that there was the person whose organs are covered over, so it's like a solid mass. It's not something that's shaped or formed. So the Almighty had to carve out, so to speak, a male organ for Abraham. And Makeves bor, a bor is a pit. It's something that's dug out. So if you have some type of familiarity with female anatomy, then this analogy will have some meaning. And Rashi says, Nu kartem nase lo nakvus. The word nu kartem has to do with digging out something. Come on, ni karti v'shosisi mayim. Has to do with digging out a well and then drinking water. So the pasuk is describing the need in the case of Sarah to have something, say, dug out, which is the formation of the female gender organs. Then, as we said, the next pasuk makes a direct reference to Avraham and Sarah being the Tsur Chutzavtem and the Bor Nukartem. Omar Rav Nachman Omar Rabbo Bar Avua Sarah Imenu Eilinus Haisa. Rav Nachman has a different description of Sarah, that she was an Eilinus. An Eilinus is a woman who does not develop gender-wise or sexually in a normal fashion. So, very simply put, an Eilinus is a woman that cannot bear children. She's not in her terms of gender. The gender is clear because the external organs appear. However, the physiological development is contorted or is warped, is stymied, stunted, and they do not develop in a normal fashion to be capable of procreation. That's an Eilinus. Shneimar vatihi Sarai akara ein lo valad. Sarah was barren, and the expression ein lo valad is superfluous if you already established she was barren, so of course she didn't have any children. So what does that expression mean? Afilu beis valad ein lo. She didn't even have the capacity organ-wise. Beis valad maybe can be associated with a uterus. She didn't even have that, which would be characteristic of an Eilinus. Omar, so naturally the birth of children, after all has been said on the part of this couple, this childless, barren, unformed, underdeveloped, gender-wise couple was miraculous, and again on a deeper philosophical level, is symbolic. These are, of course, the progenitors of the Jewish people. So the original Jews were born miraculously, and hence throughout all the generations the preservation of the Jewish people is something that is explained only in miraculous terms. Just a brief survey of world history vis-a-vis the Jewish people leads one to no conclusion other than that point, that after all the blood libels and crusades and pogroms and genocides, the Jewish people continue to exist, and if, as far as at the time of this recording, not only exist but flourish. The only explanation is what our Gemara is alluding to, a miraculous existence. The Gemara continues, Omar Rav Yehuda Breder Rav Shmuel Bar Shilas Mishmei de Rav Loi Shanu, the idea of staying, we'll say sticking it out for 10 years, that time frame is taught Ela B'daros Harishanim. In other words, it wasn't taught other than in those early generations, Shishneisem Rubos, that their life expectancy was much longer. Abraham lived to 175 years of age. Sarah lived to 127. These are lifespans that we're not familiar with. It's not common nowadays. But later generations whose life expectancy was much less, the time frame to establish whether or not the couple shall continue together is shtei shanim umechza, 2.5 years. Now 2.5 years, 2 years is 24 months, plus 6 would be 30 months, and that 30-month period corresponds to keneged shloisha iburim. That's 9 pregnancies. Each pregnancy, assuming is 9 months, that would be 3 pregnancies. Shalosha iburim is 3 pregnancies. 3 times 9 is 27, and then a month, an added month in between each one. Let's say for this recalibrating everything, and for considerations of Tuma and Tara, which Rashi explains. So that's how you get to 2.5 years. In other words, with the passage of 3 periods of pregnancy going by, and she still doesn't bear any children, this would show us that she has an established status of a barren woman. Rabbo Omar Rav Nachman Sholosh Shonim, 3 years, not 2.5 years, but 3 years. Kinget Neged Sholosh Pekidos, in corresponding to 3 Pekidos. Rashi says Sholosh Pekidos. It's very hard to translate the word Pekidos. But Rashi on the first narrow line says Sha'Kodesh Baruch Hu Pokedo Akoros. He remembers the barren women. Lishmoat Filosan B'Rosh Hashanah V'Gozer Alehem Hirayon. It's at Rosh Hashanah time that the Almighty, especially then, we'll say, hearkens unto the prayers of the barren women and decides whether or not to grant them pregnancy. So 3 years corresponds to 3 passages of Rosh Hashanah, of the beginning of a new year. Diomamar, it has been taught, Rosh Hashanah Nifkidu Sarah Rachel V'Chana, was on Rosh Hashanah that the Almighty granted their prayers to be fulfilled, their requests, their supplication to be fulfilled. These 3 great women, Sarah, Rachel, and Chana. Chana was the mother of the prophet Shmuel, Samuel the prophet. Omar Rabba. Here we have a third approach. Lesnu lahani kloli. These rules are not binding. Mifti. We said in the generations, nowadays we should spend less time. Less time is necessary before in order to reach a conclusion. So Rabbah takes exception with that. Mifti Masnisin Man Tokin, who established, who redacted the Mishnayos? Rabbi Judah the Prince, Rabbi Yehuda Anossi. V'ha b'mei David imut shani. Already from the days of King David, life expectancy was seen to be much less. Dichtiv yemei shnoiseinu b'hem shivim shana. The pasuk says that our life expectancy is basically 70 years. So that the Mishnah, which appears even later than King David, and it mentions 10 years. So the Mishnah is not making any distinction between the early generations of Abraham and Sarah, but is written at a time when the life expectancy was already down to 70 years. And still it taught one is to wait 10 years before coming to conclusions regarding this matter. The Gemara asks, or the Gemara points out, V'hai shema lo yizocha libanos heimena, and therefore the Mishnah said, and we have a little arrow, by the way, on indicating that this quote comes from Omen Aleph. The Mishnah had said that, or I should say the Gemara had said that maybe he didn't merit having a child with her. We saw that in the Tanaic source that followed the Mishnah. So he divorces her, gives her the money due to her because of their ksuba marriage contract, because maybe he didn't merit. In other words, it's his deficiency, and as a result of his deficiency, he has to part ways with her. She shouldn't have to lose out because of his problem. So the expression of Shema lo zoch libanis meno is the reason that she receives her ksuba compensation. The Gemara asks, V'dilma ihi lo zachya, maybe it was her lack of merit that she did not have children. So why should he have to pay ksuba because of her deficiency? The Gemara answers, Ihi, the woman, the wife, kevan de lo mifkida pirviribya, since she is not commanded to fulfill the mitzvah, lo mi'ansha, the lack of children is not viewed as a setback for her, and therefore she shouldn't have to lose out. We don't punish her because of the lack of children, something that she is not commanded to deal with in the first place. The Rashi in the upper part of the narrow lines, lo ichpas lo, it doesn't matter to her. V'lo onash lo kutshabrichu al avoinoiseha. The Almighty isn't going to be, the woman might have sins, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu will punish for sins, but the punishment for her sins is not going to manifest itself in her lack of bearing children. Now, if I may, just a comment that appears to me right now, very interesting interplay over here, that if a person is commanded, then the Kodesh Baruch Hu, as a means of punishment for sins, will cause the inability to fulfill a mitzvah. Now, this idea you see possibly in other sources where we say mitzvah goreres mitzvah, or more accurately schar mitzvah mitzvah, and schar avera, that if a person does sins, so his payment or his punishment is further sin, so to speak. And in this case, the inability to fulfill a mitzvah is considered a form of punishment, something that is, of course, very, very significant, and it should enable us to value mitzvah fulfillment even more, realizing that if one does have the ability to fulfill a mitzvah, that one should view that as a form of reward or merit and reward, that he has the good fortune of fulfilling a mitzvah. The Gemara says in other places, in Maseches Ksubis, also Maseches Bava Kama, and I think also in Bava Basra, when a person comes to try to do the mitzvah tzedakah, he gives money. It isn't necessarily so that automatically, just because he gave money to what he thinks is a charity, that he gets the mitzvah of tzedakah. Not everyone merits giving money to a cause that truly deserves receiving that money. And then in the event that the money is not received by someone who truly needs or deserves it, then the question is raised whether there was the fulfillment of tzedakah to begin with. Well, let's not get too much off the topic, but back in the Gemara, the Mishnah had said that he should marry if he doesn't have children with this wife, he should marry another woman. The Gemara asks, Eini, is that so? V'ha amru le rabbanon le Rabbi Abba bar Zavda nosiv itza v'oilid boni. Rabbi Abba apparently didn't have children, and the rabbis, they told him you should marry another wife and have kids. V'omarlu, and Rabbi Abba said back to them, Izakoi havu li mikomaisiv. I merited having children. I would have had from the first woman. So you see that from not having children with your first wife, that's it. You can conclude, like Rabbi Yitzchak, like this Rabbi Abba bar Zavda concludes, if I merited having children, I would have had from the first woman. So how is it that the Mishnah says that if a person doesn't have children with one wife, he should go marry another woman? The Gemara says the Mishnah stands, and as far as Rabbi Abba is concerned, Hasam dechuye kamadchile l'Rabbanan, he was simply trying to push off the Rabbanan with a push off answer, not a real answer. The Rabbi Abba bar Zavda akir mipurkei de Rav Huna. He knew that he had become sterile as a result of the lectures of Rav Huna. Now, how can a lecture render someone sterile? So this we saw in our previous year with regard to Rav Sheshes back on Samach Beis Omid Beis, where if one needs to relieve himself, one needs to urinate, and he withholds himself from doing that, that can cause some type of rupture, internal rupture, rendering the male unable to procreate. In the case of Rabbi Abba and other rabbis featured here in the Gemara, they were maybe intimidated from leaving Rav Huna's lecture, which at times went longer than one would have expected, and in the interim, the need to relieve oneself arose, and they didn't leave, and that caused them to become impotent. So this is what happened to Rabbi Abba bar Zavda. Rav Gidol Iyaka mipurkei de Rav Huna. The same thing happened to Rav Gidol. Rabbi Chelbo Iyaka mipurkei de Rav Huna. And Rabbi Chelbo also became okar, impotent. Rav Sheshes Iyaka mipurkei de Rav Huna. There's a bracketed section, and on the side of the Gemara, in our note by the star, we've written After the brackets, the Gemara gets back to this issue of people becoming sterile as a result of Rav Huna's lectures. The Gemara in the brackets reads, Rav Acha bar Yankiv Achtesei Sus Kinta. Rav Acha was Achtesei is an Aramaic word. If you take the dalit of that word, interchange it with a zayin, ochaz or ochzaso, he was taken hold of by this disease. In other words, he became sick. Achtesei suskinto. This is a type of disease that affects a person who withholds himself from relieving himself from urinating. Tal yuha ba'arza de beirav. They suspended him in on a tree, an erez tree, in the yeshiva. The nofak minei kehutza yarka, and there emerged forth from him what appeared to be a green branch, and that indicated that the disease left him. Omar Rav Acha bar Yankiv. Shisin Savi Havina, we were 60 Savi, 60 sages. Vakulu Yakur Mipurke de Rav Huna, and all 60 became impotent as a result of Rav Huna's lectures. Labar Me'ano. with myself being an exception. The kaimi b'nafshoi, I fulfilled regarding myself, hechochma t'chayeh be'aleha. Wisdom preserves he who possesses it. In other words, I knew that by withholding the urination, this could result, impotency could result, and I refused to be intimidated by the lecture, and I relieved myself when it was necessary. Girsha muteres v'chulei. The Mishnah said that when the woman who is married to her first husband remained barren for 10 years, first husband divorces her, she is allowed to marry a second man. And the Mishnah did not go on with a description of a situation where she was barren with the second fellow and he would divorce her, that she would be allowed to marry a third man who did not as yet have children. So we infer from the numbers of men in the Mishnah, Sheni in, she's allowed to marry a second man, Shlishi lo. She can't marry a third man. She's achieved the status, a chazaka, of being barren. On the side, we should point out, we have a topic heading, Bekame pomim nikba chazaka. After how many times of, let's say, a repeating phenomenon is a chazaka, a status established? And we're going to discuss this, we're going to mention this with regard to several different cases. 1, likboa akrus, to establish barrenness. 2, mila, regarding circumcision. Chashash yomus machmas mila, where a child who is circumcised and dies thereafter, we begin to suspect that maybe the actual circumcision caused the child's death. And if we can establish a status regarding that, then we'll conclude that a third child, or we'll see a third whatever, is not to be circumcised. And we said third, but it could be a fourth, because we don't know how many times, we haven't established that yet, how many times establish a chazaka. And number 3, isho katlonis, legabi nisuan, a woman who was married to a man and her first husband died, a second husband died. Do we allow her to marry a third husband, or do we say no, that after 2 times a chazaka, a status has been established that she is a katlonis? Katlonis literally would mean she's a woman, a murderous woman, but it doesn't mean that she's whipping out a knife and stabbing her husband, but it means that as a result of her marriage to men, people die on her. How many times is required to establish chazaka regarding these matters? So we continue in the Gemara. Our Mishnah spoke about her being with 2 men and not having children. As such, we say she could marry a second man, but we are not going to, the Mishnah does not feature her marrying a third man. Masnisin moni. Our Mishnah is therefore in accordance with whom? There happens to be a Tanaic controversy regarding how many times is necessary in order to establish a chazaka. Chazaka being a given status. So our Gemara says that our Mishnah is in accordance with Rebbe. The Sanya, we have a Tanaic source which features the case of the circumcision. Mola harishon umeis. She circumcised her first child and he died. Sheni umeis, a second child, and also died. Shlishi lo timol, divrei Rebbe. Rebbe says that the third child that she has, the third son that she has, shall not be circumcised. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Omer Shlishi Timol, Revi Lo Timol. A third child would also be circumcised, because after 2 times a status in Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's opinion is not established, and therefore we don't know. We assume the kid will not die, so a third child will be circumcised. Now after that, if he died, now that 3 times have gone by and the same thing happened, the 4th child should not be circumcised. The Gemara asks, but do we not have another Tanaic source taught in the opposite fashion, where Rebbe says 3 times, and Rav Shimon Gamliel says that after 2 times. So we have the source that we have in the frame, and we have the same source, but taught in an opposite fashion. And we wrote above the word Ibcha, where Rebbe would say 3 times, not just 2. So which source is more reliable? Hein minayu ach rinisa. Which source is later, which would indicate that's the way to go. It's the whatever they said, they might have said something once, but they changed their minds, and the later source is more authoritative. So which one is later? Tashma Diamar Reb Chia bar Abba Reb Yochanan Maisa ba'arba achayos v'tzipori was a story involving 4 sisters in the city of Tzipori. Shemola Rishonu Meis, the first sister circumcised her son and the child died. Shnio Meis, second sister circumcised her son and he died. Shlishis Umeis, a third sister circumcised her son and he died as well. Now notice we dashed on the line Shlishis Umeis. There was a third child that was circumcised, so we allowed it to reach 3 times. In other words, after 2 times, no conclusion would be reached. The third one was circumcised and died, so now we say Revius by the 4th child. The 4th sister had her child, and that 4th child was brought Bos Lifnei Rav Shimon Gamliel. Omar Lo Al Tamuli, and he says, do not circumcise that child. So what do we see from here? That according to Rav Shimon Gamliel, you need to have an event repeating itself 3 times before we can establish a chazaka. The Gemara challenges this. You'll see we've double underlined the word vidilma in order to highlight the challenge to the conclusion we just reached. Vidilma I asya shlishis nami have omar law. Maybe if the third sister had come before her child was circumcised, if she had come, Rav Shimon told her the same thing: don't make a move, don't circumcise. Which would indicate that after 2 times a status is established. Im Cain, if that were true, my asaduse de Reb Chia bar Abba, what was the purpose of Reb Chia bar Abba testifying, telling us about this case of the 4th woman coming to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel? If the 4th woman was not a determining factor, so why did he tell us the story? It must be that it's the 4th woman that through which we can see that it's only now that Milah should not be done, because 3 were necessary to establish a chazaka. Vidilma ha-kamashmon. Maybe the story, if you're asking, well, what was the value of the story of Reb Chia bar Abba? The value was not in terms of the numbers needed to establish a chazaka, but rather it has value for another purpose. Ha-kamashmalon. The achoyos mechaskos. Mechaskos comes from the word chazaka. That sisters can establish a chazaka. That what happens to sister 1, sister 2, and maybe sister 3 can establish a chazaka for the 4th sister, or for the 3rd sister for that matter. Omar Rova Hashto the Amris achoyos mechaskos. Actually, we should point out that the second vidilma is a question that remains, so that if you're asking which source is a later source, and you're going to rely on Reb Chia bar Abba on Reb Yochanan, you can't rely on that, because Reb Chia bar Abba quoting Reb Yochanan has significance for an unrelated point, namely that achoyos mechaskos, but it's not significant. His story isn't significant in terms of establishing the number after which a chazak is established. Rava says, "Hashtu di amris achoyis mechaskos." Now that it's been stated that which happens to one sibling can shed light on the other siblings, so that if after you see a phenomenon with sister 1, with sister 2, lo yisada misha lo mishpachas nichvin v'lo mishpachas mitzoroyin v'udis chazik tlosa zimni. So Rava says that a person, if he sees that in a family several members of the family are nichpin. Nichpin is a type of disease. Some translate it as epileptic. Rashi simply says choilin, sick, and mitzoroyim, and it's another type of, we'll say, skin ailment. They're called mitzoras. So a person sees several members of family suffering from that. Don't marry them, one of them, even one of the healthy members of the family, because that which affects one member, we saw from the case of the sisters and the milah, can shed light on other members. Rava adds, this idea of don't marry a child from a family of nichpin or mitzoraim is only if it occurred 3 times, 3 different family members. My havi Allah. So we want to know what is the final teaching. We didn't establish regarding the circumcision issue of baby 1 dying, baby 2 dying. Do you mal the 3rd baby because 2 times is not enough, or do you desist from maling the 3rd baby because 2 times is enough? He also Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef Omar. When Rav Yitzchak came, he told us, Uvda have kamei de Rabbi Yochanan be'knishta de moin. An incident happened in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan in this location, the Knishta de Moin. B'yom HaKippurim shechal lios b'Shabbos. It was a day of double seriousness. It was a day of Yom Kippur coinciding with Shabbos. Umola Rishona Umeis, Shnia Umeis. There was a milah of a first child, and it died, and a second child, and it died. Shlishis Baal Lifanav, the third, we'll say the third sister came. It came to him, to Rabbi Yochanan. Amar la l'chi umuli, go and circumcise him. So that you have 2 sisters with their children having done milah, and those children died. The third sister comes with her son on Yom Kippur that coincides with Shabbos, and Rabbi Yochanan says, go circumcise him. What would that show us? That after the fact that 2 had died previously does not create a chazaka. Omar le Abaye. So Rav Yitzchak bar Yosef, who had reported this story with Rabbi Yochanan, Abaye says, Chazi, note, Chazi learn is see, take note, the kosharis isura v'sakanta. By your, we'll call your ruling, I don't know if we'll call it leniency, but by your allowing, your insistence on the 3rd child being circumcised on Yom Kippur coinciding with Shabbos, you're in effect being lenient or lax regarding a matter of Isura. What's Isura? That would be doing an act that, if it weren't in the context of a mitzvah, would be a violation. Now, is this a mitzvah? Is mauling the 3rd child a mitzvah? So Abaye is maintaining it's not, because if a chazaka is established after 2 times, the 3rd child is basically not to be circumcised, and then circumcising him on Shabbos Yom Kippur would be a milah shelo l'tzorech, would be an unnecessary milah, and an unnecessary milah, or a milah that's not pressing for that day, because Shabbos is not, in the case that you're going to do the milah on Shabbos and it's not the 8th day of the child's life, it's called milah shelo b'zmana. A milah shelo b'zmana is not to be done on Shabbos, and if you do it on Shabbos, that's a violation of Isura. So Abaye is saying, how are you so sure that the 3rd child should be mal? Maybe after 2 times a chazaka is established, and if that would be the case, this 3rd child is not to be mal, and certainly not on Shabbos. And sakanta is you're being lax with regard to a matter of sakonas nefashos, something that could be life-threatening, so that you're by saying to mal the third kid, you're basically saying that after 2 times it's not enough to establish the chazaka. That in effect is a laxity regarding isur and sakona. Ironically, Abaye himself, who, let's say, cast a shadow on Rabbi Yitzchak's ruling, Abaye himself relies on Rabbi Yitzchak's ruling for his own life conduct in the following. Somach Allah Abaye. Abaye relied on Rabbi Yitzchak's teaching in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that only after 3 times a chazak is established, the Ozal Nasfa, and he went ahead and married Lechuma, that's the name of a woman, Chuma, Barto, the Isi, Brei, the Rabbi Yitzchak, Brei, the Rabbi Yehuda. The Chuma was the daughter of Isi, the son of Rabbi Yitzchak, the son of Rav Yehuda. This woman Chuma, when she came to Abaye, Abaye was not going to be her first husband. The Nasfa Rachba the Muzis of Shachim. She had married Rachba, name of a person from Pumpadisa, and he died. Rabbi Yitzchak Brei the Rabba Bar Chana B'Shachim. She had been married also to Rabbi Yitzchak, and he died. 2 husbands already died on her. V'nosvahu v'shachiv, and he, Abaye, went and married her and ended up dying before her. Omar Rava Umi Ika Da'avid Uvda B'nafshe Ki Hai. It's what Rava is like amazed at. How could Abaye be so, we'll say, lax regarding himself in a matter of something life-threatening, like here? V'ha ihu de Omar, he himself, Abaye himself said, Ovin Samcha, teachings that you hear in the name of Rebbe Ovin, so that you can rely on. Yitzchak Sumka Lav Bar Samcha. Yitzchak Sumka, literally Yitzchak the Red, but it's a reference to Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef. He is the Shlita that we're working with right now in our Gemara. He is the one that quoted Rav Yochanan. And Abaye himself, he says he's not reliable. And you'll ask, why is that so? Ovin Yeshnoi B'chazara. That which Rabbi Ovin says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan is reliable, because he is, the Gemara says, Yeshno b'chazar. There are 2 pshatim on what Yeshno b'chazar means found in Rashi. One pshat is, he is diligent in his review of his learning. So if he's quoting Rabbi Yochanan, you can rest assured he reviewed his learning, and hence what he reports in Rabbi Yochanan is reliable. Another explanation is that Rabbi Ovin is Samcha, he is reliable, not because of his review, but because he is always in the presence of Rabbi Yochanan, and if Rabbi Yochanan had changed his mind or had said something else, he would be aware of it. Rabbi Yitzchak, on the other hand, is not, as the Gemara says, Yitzchak Sumka Eino B'chazar. He's not always there. So if he might be reflecting, when you hear something in the name of Rabbi Yochanan through Rabbi Yitzchak Brei Rabbi Chana, you might be hearing something that Rabbi Yochanan himself had retracted from, and he, Rabbi Yitzchak, was not aware of that. V'od, and another problem, says Rava, Eimar de pligi le'inyan mila. We saw a machlokes between Rebbe and Rosh Gamliel regarding after how many times is a chazak established. That is with regard to circumcision. However, benisu and mi pligi, when it comes to matters of marriage, who says there's any machlokes? It could very well be that after 2 times a chazaka is established. L'kulei alma, everyone will agree. So what was Abaye doing when he married a woman concerning whom 2 husbands had already died? Is that not, in fact, a chazaka? The Gemara says there is a machlokes regarding nisuin as well. The Hatanya, Nises l'rishon umeis, a woman married a first husband and he died. L'sheni umeis, a second husband and he died. L'shlishi lo tinasi divrei Rebbe, the woman should not marry a third man. That's Rebbe's opinion. Omer shlishi tinasei l'rvi lo tinasei. She is entitled to marry a third man, but not a fourth man. So we see from here, contrary to the second point Rava made, we see here that there was a controversy concerning the issue of the Isha Katlonis, marriage and husband dying on woman. After how many times can we establish that she should be avoided? The Gemara asks, though, Bishlam Gabi Mila, as far as Mila, as far as this is concerned, Iko Mishpacha de Rafi Dama, V'Iko Mishpacha de Komet Dama. The circumcision, of course, is the removal of a foreskin, and there's bleeding. There are families, and this sounds a bit like hemophilia, where there's no clotting of the blood, and there are families, the Rafi Dama, where the blood is thin in the sense that it doesn't clot, and there are mishpachas, the Komet Dama, where the blood does clot. So, in the case of Mila, we can see that we can understand why children might die, and you need a certain number of times in order to establish that is the cause of death. Ella nisuin my taima. What's the connection in the case of marriage with the men having died while married to these women? How are these women, so to speak, responsible for their husband's death? Omar lei Rav Mordechai Rav Ashi Hachi Omar Avimi Mehagronya Mishmei Rav Huna Ma'ayon Gorem. Ma'ayon literally is a well, but it has to do with the act of intimacy, and the woman represents a well. And in a manner of speaking, we're saying that the woman might have poison within her that's transmitted to her husband during intimacy, causing his death. This too is reminiscent of some communicable diseases during the act of intimacy that nowadays we are familiar with. And Rav Ashi Omar Mazol Gorein. It's the mazal, the fortune, the good fortune or lack thereof that causes the death. My binayu. What is the difference between, or where is there a manifest difference between these two explanations? Avimi, who says it's ma'ayon gorem, and Rav Ashi, who says mazal gorem. Iko binayu de irsa umis. Point of difference between the two explanations would be manifest in a case where a third husband, irsa is where he gives money to her in exchange for her agreeing to marry him, and it's what we call the first stage of marriage, where they did not engage in intimacy yet. So a third husband did erusin with this man. In other words, the man was ma'aris, he was a third man, ma'aris her, didn't cohabit with her, and died. Inami, another point of difference would be denofal midiklo meis. A third husband died as a result of falling out of the tree. So looking at these two examples, if you say ma'ayon goreim, then she is not, there is no issue of ma'ayon in either of these cases. In the first case, they didn't live together, and in the second case, the death is so clearly ascribable to his falling out of the tree. So that if you say that, let us say, you need 3 times to establish a chazaka, and the third husband died after either erusin or as a result of falling out of a tree, so that would not establish a chazaka if you say that you need 3 times to establish a chazaka. If you say, however, it's mazal, it's her mazel combining with him in marriage that causes his death. So then that is true over here. She apparently has some type of mazel. Again, how to translate that is difficult. It has to do with what we call the horoscope, or time of year in which she was born, that has an effect on whom she has contact with, even if it's not contact of an intimate nature. Omar lei Rav Yosef brei de Rava l'Rava. Rav Yosef, the son of Rava, asks Rava, Boi minei me Rav Yosef halacha kerebi. So Rav Yosef says to Rava that I asked of Rav Yosef, is the halacha like Rebbe? V'yomar li in, and he says yes. Halacha kerabban Shimon Gamliel, is the halacha like him? And Rav Shimon argued with Rebbe. V'yomar li in, yes, the halacha is like him. Achuchi achichbi, are you laughing at me? In other words, you're paskening like two opinions that contradict each other. Amarle lo, he says, I'm not laughing at you. Stami ninu, you have you have unnamed Tanaic sources. Stam means a source that doesn't carry a name with it, which is associated with something very reliable and authoritative. Stami ninu upashit loch, and I ruled accordingly. Nisuin umalkius kerebi. In the case of marriages and the case of lashings, we find an unnamed source that says that the chazak is established after 2 times. Vestos v'shohamua, 2 other topics. Vestos, which has to do with a woman establishing a fixed cycle for her female monthly period, and the issue of shor hamua, the goring ox, Kerabon Shimon ben Gamliel, that chazak is established only after 3 times that the same thing repeats. Nisuin Hadamar, the issue of Nisuin, we said he had ruled that Nisuin is going to be like Rebbe, that a chazak is established after 2 times. Hadamar, on that which we have already discussed, a woman who marries men, and after 2 men dying on her, we won't allow her to marry a 3rd man, because with regard to Nisuin, we're ruling like Rebbe, that twice establishes a chazaka. Malkios, what's the case of Malkios, of lashings? Misha Loka Vishana, a person who was lashed because he violated a negative command. And after receiving the lashes, he goes ahead and does the same sin again and gets lashed. At this point, based in Kainsinaysa L'Kipa, Bezin will put him into a very confined space, a very small confined space called a kippah, and we feed him barley, until his stomach cracks, and obviously he dies. So that if you have a person that sinned twice and was lashed twice, if he sins a 3rd time, we consider him totally wicked, and therefore he's treated with this kippah method. Vestos disnan. It was just mentioned that regarding vestos, the ruling would follow Rav Shimon Gamliel, that only after 3 times do we say a veses has been established. We haven't explained that very thoroughly, and in fact we're going to go over this topic rather superficially, simply because it's dealt with at much greater length elsewhere, particularly in Maseches Nida. Disnan, the Stam Mishnah, we have to emphasize that we're dealing with sources that are Tanaic and have no name in them, indicating that they are authoritative. So regarding Vestos, we have an unnamed source that reflects the opinion of Shimon Gamliel that after 3 times a status of chazak is established. And it reads, Ein ho isha, we continue at the top of Daf Samachay, Kaivas law veses, a woman does not establish a regularity ad shetik be'ena shalosh pa'amim, until that either date of blood sighting or phenomenon that is followed by a blood sighting, it's either time, date related or action related, until it repeats itself 3 times. In other words, the same thing or the same date repeats itself 3 times, upon which she then sees blood. And once a woman is a vesis has been established, so then the way we treat her regarding the laws of Nida are different than the way we deal with a woman that does not have an established vesis, an established regularity. V'ein mitaheres min avesis av shetei oker mimeno shalosh pamim. A woman, let us say, that had an established pattern, either in terms of time or action, that pattern cannot be undone unless the expected time passes 3 times and no blood flow takes place. So that, just to use a simple example, if a woman, let us say, saw her female menstrual blood sighting on the 20th of each month, so that means that she anticipates her sighting of blood only on day 20 of the subsequent month. Let us say 3 months went by, and on the 20th of each one of those months, no blood was sighted. After that happens 3 times, and we say that the next 20th is not something that she has to concern herself with vis-a-vis the laws of Nida. Now again, I know we didn't explain this in detail with all its ramifications, but we successfully, hopefully of course, communicated this idea of 3 times establishing a regularity. Of course, in the context of vestos. And number 4, v'shor hamuad. What's the case of the goring ox? Disnan. Ein hashor nase muad. A goring ox, by the way, as opposed to a shor tam, which is in distinction with a shor hamuad, a shor tam, the non-goring ox. The major difference between the two is the amount that the owner would have to pay in the event that his ox gores and damages. If it's a shor ha-muad, full payment is made. If it's not yet established to be a muad, only half payment is made, chatzi nezek. So a shor ha-muad is featured in the following unnamed source. Destan eina shor nase muad ad shayidu bo shloisha pe'omim. It's not established to be a muad until testimony concerning its goring takes place 3 times. That only after 3 testimonies of this ox goring would there then kick in a payment of nezek sholing, full damage compensation. But prior to that, after the first goring or after the second goring, only half payment is made. After the third goring, also half payment is still made until a 4th goring takes place. So that you see from here that in order to establish the status of it being a goring ox, 3 witness testified gorings would have to have taken place.